I'm Dave Rintoul. I'm a retired biologist from Kansas State University and a birder and a photographer, and I've been interested in sandhill cranes for a long time. I've actually done some research with them. I've been interested in going to Quivira for a long time, so when I was asked to do this, I said, sure. It seems like a very valuable thing to do. So what are we going to do here? Here's a little roadmap to tell you where this is going. First of all, we're going to just introduce cranes. What are they? What do they look like? Where are they found? I'm going to talk about specifically sandhill cranes and the populations of sandhill cranes that are in the United States, and then concentrate on the ones that come through Quivira. We're going to talk about migration, both in terms of where these birds spend the winter, spend the spring and fall, and spend the summer, but the timing. And finally, we're going to talk about Quivira. So that's the way we're going to go. We'll start out with a little bit about cranes. What's a crane? Well, that's a good question. I often, as people know that I'm a birder, and I get phone calls, and somebody tells me I saw a crane in my pond or lake or stream, and I said, "Wow, that's cool." If it's in the middle of the summer, I would probably say you probably didn't, because a lot of people can confuse a lot of our tall wading birds, including mostly great blue herons, that do resemble cranes, but cranes are different from herons in a number of ways. First of all, they usually have at least part of their head that's unfeathered, and they therefore have colorful skin sometimes that's showing through. It's used in displays for pair bonding or for aggression. So that's one of the things. They don't eat the same things as herons. Herons tend to be hanging out in ponds, eating fish and frogs and snakes occasionally. But cranes go through, oops, let me go back through that. Go through a different lifestyle. They are often in fields, digging up stuff. They eat a lot of waste grain in migration, but in their summer habitat and winter habitat, they will be digging up corms and bulbs and things like that. So they need a heavier bill. They don't have the sort of long, pointy dagger bill that a great blue heron would have. And finally, you better get real close to see this. And if you see this, you're probably too close. But they do have a hind toe that's elevated above their front three. And so you can look at the tracks in the mud sometimes and say that had to be a crane, because herons would have all four toes flat on the ground. So that's another clue. And they have very complex mating rituals that involve things which we, anthropomorphically call dancing. Here are a couple of crowned cranes from Tanzania in Africa dancing. And this isn't restricted to the time of year where you would consider them to be courting and mating. They do it year round. They usually strengthen the pair bond by these sort of stylized, ritualized interactions that herons don't do. Herons don't have that particular behavior. And they're ancient. Some of the oldest fossil birds we know are cranes. In fact, there's a fossil from Nebraska that dates to back about 10 million years. And from what we know about crane phylogeny a little bit, we'll go into that in a little bit, but it's probable that that was an ancestor of the sandhill crane that we have in North America today. It's also an ancestor of that bird you just saw, the gray-crowned crane from Africa, which is, as far as we know, the closest relative of sandhill cranes. Not many birds have fossil records going back that far. We have bird fossils from that far back, but not things that we can recognize as a bird that's still hanging out here today. Around the world, there are 15 species. Some of them are doing very well. Some of them are not. They're highly endangered. Cranes tend to be specific in terms of their habitat requirements, and that in a world with more people and with climate change can get you into trouble, because what you're used to isn't going to be there after a while. So let's talk about some other cranes that you might have heard of. There are another North American crane. The only other North American crane is the whooping crane. And when you talk about highly endangered, you all know that story. It was highly endangered. It was down to less than 20 individuals in the 1940s. They're doing okay. They're coming back. It's going to take a long time. They have one baby a year. This is a trio, a family group actually, from Quivira a few years back. The two big white birds are the parents, and the brownish rusty colored bird is the young of the year. They often will lay two eggs and hatch both eggs, but they only raise one baby. They migrate together in the fall migration. The family groups, you'll see trios all along the way south. They will take the baby south the first time, and then on the way back north, they have to figure out a way to lose him, and he's on his own after that. The gray crown crane here is the other bird in the mix. Is there because A, I had a picture of it, and B, it is also the closest living relative phylogenetically to the crane. I'm somehow I'm switching. I'm not touching anything, but this is going too fast. So let's go back. Gray crown crane is a bird that doesn't look a lot like a sandhill, but you can see on that picture at least some of the bare unfeathered parts on the head, and give it some color. Okay, now and sandhill crane and its scientific name, Antigone canadensis. You may have it in your bird books and field guides as the GRU, Grus canadensis. It's not anymore. It's been relocated, and in fact, that's the same genus as that gray crown crane that you just saw. What do they look like? Well, they're about 3 to 4 feet tall, depending on the subspecies. They weigh about 6 to 12 pounds, depending on the subspecies. They have a 6 to 7 foot wingspan, and they need that because, as you'll see, they fly a long ways, and they have to spend a lot of time in the air. They live a long time. Santo cranes are known to live in the wild anywhere from 20 to 40 years, which is much longer than your typical bird. And they are also monogamous. That 20 to 40 years may often be spent with the same mate. They will mate for life. They are something that is a little unusual in that regard for tall wading birds. Conservation wise, sandhill cranes are mostly stable. The population that goes through Quivira is stable or increasing, in fact. But there are two non migratory populations of sandhill cranes in North America that are threatened and are declining, and we'll talk a bit about them here in the next slide. Okay, so this is a map from the birds of North America, formerly known as the birds of North America, the birds of the world now. And it shows you wintering sites, mostly Texas and Mexico, as well as places in California and Florida. Shows the migration pathway. These guys from Florida go straight up through the eastern part of the country to the Great Lakes. These guys from Texas and Mexico go a long way. Some of them end up, in fact, in Siberia. So the 5 recognized subspecies of the sandhill crane that are currently classified is the lesser, which is the common one you see at Quivira, Antigone canadensis. The greater, Antigone canadensis tabida, which also goes through Quivira. And then there are the Florida sandhill cranes, which are a bird that, if you have spent some time in Florida, you often see these wandering around on people's lawns. It's kind of astounding to see a crane that close, but in fact, you can. There's a Mississippi sandhill crane, this guy here, Antigone canadensis pulla, which is a sedentary population, and a Cuban sandhill crane, which is also a sedentary population. So there are 3 non-migratory ones. There's the Florida ones. Even though there are some birds that winter in Florida from the Great Lakes, there's some birds that stay there the whole year round. There's these Cuban ones, and there's these Mississippi birds. The migratory populations of the lesser and the greater have separate breeding ranges, but they do mingle with each other in staging areas. This is a staging area along the Platte. These are staging areas for the fall migration across the Dakotas and Minnesota. And they greater sandhill cranes, as we'll see in the next slide, tend to end up here. Lesser sandhill cranes tend to end up here. But when they all come back, they often come back into that part of the world. And these guys, we'll talk about them in a second. Okay, so how do they migrate? This is a paper from 2005, and so it's a little bit out of date, believe it or not. But it is the paper on which the molecular phylogenetics was based. And so, what happens? The mid-continent birds, which are the birds we're going to be seeing at Quivira, they breed from eastern Siberia to the Hudson Bay, and they winter in Texas along the coast and in the panhandle of Texas, as well as in the southern part of New Mexico and the northern part of Old Mexico. So that's the mid-continent population, the ones that are doing well, and we'll see plenty of them at Quivira. There's a Rocky Mountain population. These are the ones that hang out in the wintertime at Bosque del Apache in New Mexico. If you've ever been there in the winter, it's a pretty cool place to be. And they summer up here in the mountains, basically Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and a little tiny chunk of Utah. And you can see them in the summer in those high mountain ranges. I've got pictures of some from Yolo Pass, which is the pass that Lewis and Clark went over in Idaho to get across to the other side. So that's the Rocky Mountain population, and they don't show up at Quivira. The eastern flyway birds also don't show up at Quivira. They winter in Florida and Georgia, and they breed in the Great Lakes region. So these are the birds that Aldo Leopold would have seen had he, if you've read Sand County Almanac, he talks about the cranes that are hanging out around his shack. Those are Aldo Leopold's birds. Pacific flyway birds range from coastal Alaska and British Columbia and winter in the Central Valley of California. And the Central Valley birds winter in the Central Valley, but breed basically again in the mountains, the intermountainous regions of British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and Nevada. That's a bird that you don't hear much about, but they're doing okay too. And then there are the three sedentary populations: Mississippi, Florida, and Cuban sandhill cranes. So you see, it's kind of complicated. You have to, when you think about cranes, you can't just think about one kind of crane. There's all these other populations and all of these places that they go, and all these other places that they spend the winter and spend the summer. But you can see them in many states, as you can see from this. Okay, well, let's talk about the timing of migration. This is a map, an animated map from Ebird. I don't know if you might use Ebird to keep track of your bird records, but if you don't use it to do that, you should at least check it out because it has some amazing scientific information there. So this is an animation map, and if we click on it, you'll see these birds, which starts in January. These birds will start to move up into the rest of the world. And by April, they're pretty much gone through here. They're clear up into, you can see there's a little island up here. We'll let it run through again. I think it's going to loop. You can see that there's this tiny little island all the way up in the Canadian Arctic where they end up, as well as along the coast here and well into eastern Siberia, a couple hundred miles across eastern Siberia. So the other thing that's interesting about this is you'll see, relative to that map we saw before, if we stop it, can we stop it? Yes, we can stop it. When they come back, I can't stop it like I want to stop it. Let's try it over here. Can we move that thing? Yeah, we can move that thing. Okay, let's go. Let's go to December. Well, it doesn't want to go to December. It goes to January. In January, it's still the same. There are birds in Kansas. There are sandhill cranes in Kansas in December and January, and they shouldn't be there. They're very different kind of behavior from the historical pattern. So that's the thing that we don't haven't seen in the past, but is something that can be sort of provocative in that regard. So let's talk about the sandhill cranes that we're going to see. These are birds in the mid-continent population. In the fall, right now, they leave the breeding areas in October. And if they're a greater sandhill crane and they stop in those staging areas, they take their time coming back, but they arrive on the Texas coast sometime in November. The lessers, since they breed in a much wider breeding range from Siberia to the Hudson Bay. Some of those populations, some of those birds leave the breeding area very early. Some of them can hang out a long time, but they arrive in their wintering areas also in November, and they stop over at many sites just like these guys, and that's where they can get together and maybe sometimes interbreed. In the spring, there's a lot bigger hurry. Both the graders and the lessers leave their wintering areas in February. They go to the Platte where they get fat. They can put up to 35% of their body weight on in that time, 6 weeks along the Platte River. And they get to the breeding range, depending on where that is. It's May in Siberia and April in most of the rest of the range of these birds. That is something that is still fairly typical, but there are now some exceptions. Yeah. So, all right, let's talk about Corvera. What's happening at Corvera? Again, these are Ebird data. So Ebird data that are from Stafford County and Martin County. This is Corvera, this is Cheyenne Bottoms, and it is from the last 5 years, January through December 2015 to 2020. So what do you see? Well, you see the big spring brush here, start in February and petering out by the middle of March. And you see that they come back and they drag that out a little bit longer. Should start to see birds here pretty quick. In fact, there are birds. There were already cranes at Corvera a week ago, and there'll be more and more and more as November gets closer. So the other thing which is curious about this is you can see there are currently cranes at Corvera or Cheyenne Bottoms for much of the winter, and that's unusual, which are historically not their wintering sites. So these are the same data in a bar graph or a sort of a histogram kind of a thing. From older times, 1990 to 2000, you can see that in the winter there weren't any cranes at those two counties, and now there are. And you can also see that they migrated a little later in those early years relative to what they're doing now. So they're out of there by mid-April. There used to be cranes hanging out some years anyway, up until mid-May, and that we'll talk about that, why that might happen. But it's likely that they get to the breeding grounds in a different time frame now as well, and they leave the breeding grounds, as you can see, earlier than they used to. They start to arrive here relatively quickly. So that's probably climate change. Probably their breeding grounds are opening up a little quicker than they used to. They can bring off a clutch, have young, and start back a little earlier than they used to. So we're seeing not only changes in the wintering populations, but changes in the temporal pattern of crane migration. All righty, so let's sum up and see what we may have talked about. We talked about populations and subspecies and that they have different life histories, different migratory paths, different places that they go, but they basically go all the way across Canada, Alaska, and well into Siberia. They overlap in the spring and the fall at stopover sites. A big overlap in the spring and a lesser overlap in the fall just because spring migration is a lot more intense and a lot more hurried. Their migration phenology is changing. They migrate earlier than they used to. They come back earlier than they used to. And they often spend the winters further north than they did. They're not just in Texas anymore. They are actually spending the winter sometimes in Kansas in relatively big numbers. That is a little weather dependent. If it gets really, really nasty, they will head south. But in most years now, they can successfully overwinter at Corvera and Cheyenne Bottoms. And we don't know for sure if they arrive at the nesting sites earlier now, but that's a pretty good guess since they leave here earlier now. Those nesting sites tend to be very, very isolated and very, very full of mosquitoes. So if people want to test that hypothesis, I'd be happy to read the data, but it's not going to be me. It's a long ways up there and difficult to look at. And these changes in the nesting, in the migration phenology and wintering phenology is consistent with what we would predict based on climate change models. Okay, so that's it. I'm also going to show you one last picture. These are sandhill cranes at the Audubon of Kansas Sanctuary along the Niobrara in northern Nebraska. Historically, sandhill cranes nested in Nebraska. They didn't through much of the 20th century. In 2012, a pair showed up in this wet meadow, and they've been there since. This is a parent, and this is a youngster. And a young crane is called a colt because they're long and leggy, like colts and horses. So that's it. I'm done, and be happy to entertain questions if you have questions.
I do have a question that's come through. If you are ready for it.
I hope so.
Yeah. It's from, they want to know, when sandhill cranes overwinter in Kansas, how many can there be here?
It depends on the weather. Some years there won't be any. If it really gets nasty, they'll head south. They're not stupid. But I think there've been, I'd have to go back and look, but 12 to 20,000 cranes at Quivira, and other places in western Kansas. There's some, I think, have wintered at Lake McKinney out in Kearney County, but it really is weather dependent, and so nasty weather will push them south.
So they could stay here all winter, and the weather was good.
If the weather's decent, and it's, you know, men that way, yeah. They live on the edge of winter, as the title of the slideshow is.
Yeah.
They don't mind a little winter, that they don't need a lot of winter.
I have another question that's from Charlie Griffin, and he asks, he's seen cranes in Yellowstone that are quite reddish brown. Is that from the minerals in the water or a variation of color?
Yeah, it's basically they color themselves with mud to more closely look like the surroundings. It's the minerals in the water. Yeah, they're basically iron oxidized.
Yeah. Kind of like flamingos are that way too, aren't they? Their color.
Well, that's dietary. This is like, you know, this is makeup.
Oh, I see. Okay, we have another question. Sandhills today eat grain as they migrate. What did they eat before the United States was transformed by development? And did that mean they were significantly fewer birds than we see today?
We don't have a clue what the population was. Sandhill cranes seem to be stable or maybe even growing, and grain harvests might be part of that. They traditionally would dig in those meadows to get bulbs and corms and things like that that were larger than a kernel of corn and as nutritious. But they do need to put on a lot of weight on those staging grounds in the spring, and so they'll eat about anything, and they just have opportunistically switched to Nebraska corn.
Yeah. And there's a lot of it there now.
There's a lot of it there.
Yeah, yeah. So let's see, don't have any other questions at the moment, but what are some frequently asked questions about sandhill cranes that you've heard when you see somebody at Quivira or somewhere else?
A lot of them have to do with, you know, is that a heron? You know,
yeah.
that is pretty easy to talk about. Part of the mystique of cranes in general, not just sandhills, is the long-lived monogamy. It's pretty unique. For most birds, monogamy is not a thing, and for most birds, they don't live 25 years. And so when people hear about that, they have, you know, sort of piques their interest in the bird itself. And the other one is, you know, that they're obviously when they migrate, they're visual. A lot of birds use the stars. A lot of birds use magnetism. A lot of birds use polarized light. Cranes are visual. They only migrate during the day, and that's why they take the kid south with them, so the kid learns the way. And if the kid gets lost, he can get way lost. A few years ago, there was a whooping crane youngster that got separated from the parents that overwintered in Oklahoma. It didn't have a clue where Aransas, Texas was, because its mom and dad, you know, lost it, or it lost them, or, you know, it went out for a beer. I don't know what it did. But it wintered in Oklahoma, and it did that for several years.
I'll be darned.
So
Wow.
they need mom and dad to take them south and show them the ropes, and then mom and dad have to like break free from that kid on the way back north. It's
Think they
a
found him again, or
I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't have a clue. I mean, the kid obviously knew the way back to Wood Buffalo Park in
yeah.
Alberta. I think it was sighted up there, but it was sighted the next year in Oklahoma.
Oh my God.
It's like, why?
Yeah.
So yeah, but they're very visual in terms of that, and that's kind of unique too. A lot of birds, migrate at night, and so they can't go by landmarks. But cranes obviously do.
Wow.
They know landmarks. They got some kind of spatial memory that's just phenomenal.
Yeah. Wow. Um, I have another question here. Do sandhill cranes have diverse calls besides that prehistoric clattering we hear when they're leaving and returning to nesting areas?
The juveniles have a little kind of a whistle, and if you ever go up to the Platte and get in one of those blinds, and when the cranes come and settle in, you can hear all of the crane noises that you associate with cranes, those grrr, grrr
Yeah.
noises. But then the juvies have a kind of a higher pitched whistle. But other than that, they really don't have any different calls that I know of. I mean,
Yeah.
there may be some.
Yeah. Huh. I have another question. They said, do you have any thoughts on how pairs keep track of each other in the massive flocks?
No. I mean, since we can't tell them apart, we can't even tell the sexes apart. They obviously know not just who's a girl and who's a boy, but they know who their mate is. Mind-boggling, frankly.
Yeah.
I just, there may be subtle call, noises that they catch up on, but yeah, I have no idea and I don't think we'll ever know that, frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't get into their heads, but that is one of the things that's just absolutely mind-blowing about it. Yeah, there's 500,000 birds on the Platte in March, and they know who they're going home with.
Gee whiz, that is really, when you think about it.
Yeah, it's astounding.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. And how does the kid know that that's mom and dad?
Yeah.
That's another thing. It's crazy.
Wow. Is that they don't smell that much, do they? So I mean,
no, most birds don't have very high sense of smell at all. Yeah. It's vocal or behavioral and birds' visual systems are different than ours. They can see ultraviolet, for example. So there may be some, subtle variations in that. But I mean, we're talking about 500,000 birds, man. I mean,
yeah,
you'd have a hard time picking out your husband in a crowd of 500,000 people.
Oh, I could probably pick mine out, but
yeah, maybe you could.
This person says, no worries about the lag timing. Content and photos were received fine. Patience with election voting is much more tiring.
That's right. Yeah, you've got different kinds of talking heads here now.
Yeah, right. Their longevity is amazing. And that long-term population concerns. And he asks, are sandhill cranes still hunted in Kansas?
Yes.
Yes.
The only place in the Central Flyway, and that includes Alaska and the Canadian provinces, where they are not hunted is Nebraska. They're hunted in every state on the way south. Wow.
Nebraska knows what they've got there.
Yeah, I mean, they're making money off of the spring migration, then they're not, but there has been pressure in Nebraska to open a sandhill crane season. I mean, it's, it's what it is.
Yeah, it's what it is. Yeah. Let's see. Here it says, could you talk more about their mating dances and throwing sticks in the air and that sort of thing?
I don't know a lot about that. There's certainly a lot in the literature about that, and not just for sandhills, but for other cranes. But yeah, they often will pick up a stick or a corn stalk and toss it in the air and dance around. But all of the crane mating behaviors and pair bonding behaviors are very stylized. And so behavioral ecologists have got a lot of literature on that. I personally don't know that literature at all.
Let's see. The paired sandhill cranes that this person's seen in Idaho showed synchronous wing beats when they were flying. Is that true of all cranes, do you think?
I don't know. I have no idea. That's cool.
That's cool. Yeah, I don't know either. Okay. Another question here is, how old are cranes when they reach breeding age?
Well, they can theoretically reproduce when they're 2 or 3. Typically, they don't find a mate until they're 7 or 8.
Wow.
And typically, they're so bad at it that they don't have a baby that makes it south until they're like 9 or 10.
Wow.
So they find a mate, and then they, kind of set up housekeeping and screw it up for a couple of years, and then they finally get it right, and but they hatch 2 eggs, and most of those eggs will hatch, but one of them is just a lot of reasons, but it's younger, it's smaller, doesn't get fed as much, can't walk as fast as the other one to find, because they're not going to feed the babies as much, so they kind of lead them around and show them what to eat. And so the second one, it's fairly rare that they will come south with 2 kids, usually just one. But it does take them 9 years, 8 to 9 years before they are starting to replace themselves in the population, which is part of the reason why it was really thought to be, the data weren't real clear on that, whether that population was growing or shrinking when Kansas proposed its hunting season. And with a bird that takes that long to reproduce, you got to be real careful. I mean, ducks can replace themselves times 10 in a season. Santo crane can't do that. So management practices that work with ducks are really not going to be directly applicable to a bird that takes 9 years to reproduce itself in the population. But so far they're hanging in there. They're doing okay.
And you've seen quite a few. You were out there last week, I believe.
Yeah, there were probably 30,000 sandhill cranes off the west side of the wildlife drive out. Yeah, that's typically where they tend to spend the night, and then in the morning they head out to wherever the cornfield is. A lot of them were heading sort of northwest from there. A lot of them were heading straight north from there. So they will find a spot where there's some waste grain or something, but that's also where they're hunted. They're not hunted on the refuge. They're hunted out there in those fields where people have to set up decoys and, take a shot at them when they go by.
Wow. I'd hate to have to shoot them. I just, not a good idea.
Well, the thing is, I suspect if you shot a young one, it would be pretty tender. But if you shot a 30-year-old crane, I mean, you might as well eat your boot. I mean, that thing is been around a while, It's pretty old and stringy,
That's another insight there. I didn't think about that. Well, not have any more questions at the moment. So maybe we answered everybody pretty good.
Hope so. Now they're going to go back and watch the news.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah. I would like to let everybody know that they're on the website. Audubon of Kansas is also a survey about our this virtual event, and if you would take the time to fill that out, that would be great. We'd like to know how things, which ones you like, what you didn't like, that kind of thing. Of course, the lagging slides is going to be there probably, but we'll try and fix that and get that.
Well, I don't think you can fix it. I think actually we're going to have to do it over, because I do think it's because it was changing on me without me touching this keyboard or this mouse.
Yeah.
It had some timing on that narration that it had retained from the previous practice session, and that's not good. I can't repeat that timing, so obviously.
We'll go back and look and see if we can.
Yeah,
what we can do.
yeah, but I think that's the most viable hypothesis at this point.
Oh, well, I love technology. It's always a learning curve here.
Yep.
Doesn't always go according to plan, but it was a great talk, though. I mean, I think everybody really enjoyed that. We got some good questions too, which is nice.
Yeah, so, well, that's good.
Yeah.
And maybe they even got some good answers. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully they did. Okay, well, we can say, I guess it was one other thing that I want to make sure people know that these videos are still available. You can still watch them going to the website. They're also public, so I think if you did a search on YouTube, you find them there as well. But they're definitely still accessible, the ones that we've already done, if you go. And then we have 2 great ones coming up on Saturday, so try and join us for that at 11 and then one at 2:30. And that one's about water with Rex. But the one
if Saturday will be a great day to go to Quivira. So if you have that opportunity, you should do that.
Yeah, if you have the opportunity, yes, definitely. And then watch the videos later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because Liz Smith is also really good because she does, it's all on hooping cranes. She's down in.
Yeah, and there are hoopers at Quivira yesterday. I don't know if there's any there today, but
last week there's been.
Last week there were 8 or 10, and they're still coming through.
Yeah, that's great.
Yep.
And I thought it was interesting that last year when we had this live event at Quivira, Liz was one of our speakers also, and she saw 2 hoopers that were tagged, and they were ones that she then saw.
Oh, nice. That's sweet. Yeah, that's really sweet.
That was very nice. Yeah, she reported that, so I thought that was pretty cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're done here. Our work is done.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and we'll see if we can fix that video. But
okay, talk to you later.
Evidently, it was still informative. So
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.